Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Anahita Kopal, and I'm the board chair for Nonprofit Westchester. And on behalf of myself and my fellow board members and our executive director, Jan Fisher, I want to thank you very much for being here with us today. We know how challenging it is just to keep our member organizations operating during these difficult times, and we very much appreciate your taking the time to have this conversation with us. We think it's very important that we remain focused on the broader issues affecting our sector and continue to have conversations with our elected officials about what we need to be successful for our members and for the constituents that we serve. So again, thank you for taking the time out of your day. If it's challenging to run a nonprofit in these times, it is infinitely more challenging to be a leader in these times. And we want to thank Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Senator Shelley for their leadership, not only during this period, but the many years of our association with them. We want to thank them for their willingness to engage with us today and for their listening and advocacy on our behalf in recent years as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Rich Nightingale, our board vice chair, who will be helping to facilitate today's discussion with the senators. Thank you.
Thanks, Anahita. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning, NPW. Good morning, friends and partners of our organization. As Anahita just said, and nobody needs to be reminded, these are unprecedented times, but NPW and all of our member organizations stay hard at work. Our public policy committee continues to meet and continues to make a strategy for the things that are important in our sector. So thanks to Jan Fisher for helping put together today's event, and thank you, of course, to our two incredible senators for joining us. I don't think either of these two individuals are new to anyone in the nonprofit landscape in Westchester. We're really privileged to be represented by Senate Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins and Senator Mayer, and they've been strong advocates and leaders in our community for a long time. Before I give them the floor, which is what we're all here for today, not to hear from me, I just want to mention a few things that are important to NPW and things that we continue to hear from our member organizations to kind of frame today's discussion. So a few of those and a few of the things that we've been discussing are how nonprofit businesses in Westchester can continue to address the needs of some of New York State's most vulnerable individuals and families and communities. Obviously, nonprofit members are on the front lines. We often do this work under-resourced. We're often really stretched to the limit. And our frontline workforce is, to be frank, often underpaid. So we are on the front lines, but we need resources and we need support to deliver for vulnerable communities. Many of our employees are essential workers. They have to work at this time. Many of our organizations are in the category of first responders or part of a response to needs, and our services are only needed now more than ever. Some other topics that continue to be very important to us, in addition to our essential workforce, is the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on lower income communities, on communities of color, on the immigrant community, what the nonprofit's role is in economic recovery and post-pandemic efforts and what that looks like, the current state of the nonprofit sector and resource allocation, how we reopen our businesses and reemerge after all of this. Also, many concerns have come in about the welfare of young people during the coronavirus, and we know that we are all in this adapting and distance learning, but for lower income communities, for children that don't have internet in the house, these impacts are not the same across the board. We're very concerned about the financial picture moving forward as we rely on grants and tax revenue often to deliver vital services. And that's probably a decent summary. We recognize, of course, as I said before, these are unprecedented times. The state is under tremendous pressure financially and tremendous pressure from a human services standpoint in terms of taking care of everyone and keeping everyone safe. Support from the federal government is not clear. and our state is facing huge budget challenges that will down to Westchester and will filter down to our local community. So there's a lot here. We all know that. We're all, working together to continue to be of service and of value to our populations and our clients and and really great opportunity to hear from our state about that are going on, plans that are coming up, and to ask some questions as well. So I will encourage everyone to write questions on the Facebook feed, on the YouTube feed. We will do our best at the end, and some questions have already come in, so we certainly won't get to all of them, but we'll try to do some at the end here. So at this time, I just want to thank our senators again and everyone for joining us, and give both an opportunity to, I know I gave you enough to chew on there for a little while. Thank you again to Senate Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins and Senator Mayer. And I think we'll start with you, Senator Stewart-Cousins, to address some of these concerns and give us about a 10 or 15-minute overview of some of what you're seeing around some of these topics.
Thank you so much, Rich, and it's good to see you. And as you told me, we could tell everybody you are now the daddy of brand new baby number 3. So congratulations and all the best. You did a wonderful synopsis. So before I get into reaffirming what it is that you've said, I will thank Anahata for being the chair of the board of this incredibly important organization. And of course, my good friend Jan, who I've known for a very, very long time. Thanks for making sure that you're able to talk about these things. And I'm always happy to share a forum with my friend and colleague, Shelley Mayer, who, again, has been a tremendous partner for me. No matter where we are, we seem to have been able to kind of complement each other in the work that we do on behalf of the community. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to represent half of Westchester, pretty much. Shelley represents the other half. But, we have a Senate delegation that is extremely, extremely invested in not only public service, but actually understanding that government's role is to provide, obviously, for everyone, but we have to make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable. And so my other colleagues who represent Westchester, Senator Pete Harcum, who's, again, an incredible advocate, Senator Carlucci, Senator Biaggi, and Senator Bailey. So they're, Westchester's represented quite amply in the Senate. And again, I have the privilege to be the leader of not only that delegation, but of 40 of us. So as the majority, we have, obviously had to really grapple with what is happening here. And it first started back in March, where it became extremely clear that we were facing something that was going to be very, very different from anything we'd been called upon to face. And it's why, for the first time in my leadership, I called the Senate back to order. Usually when we gavel out for the day. But there were, there was, this indication from the governor, from what we were hearing from our staff, and understanding that we were going to face this incredible challenge. And so I called the Senate back into session at 7:30 that night. And on March 2nd, we passed $40 million to help combat coronavirus. And we gave the governor some extraordinary temporary powers in order to be nimble as we faced this pandemic. And, sadly, on March 3rd, the first case in Westchester was revealed in New Rochelle. And obviously, it's a city that both Senator Mayer and I represent. And the rest, is history. As of today, we are over 300,000 cases, and we have had, over 20,000 deaths, sadly. And obviously, we believe that we have reached the peak and we are on the decline, but we are still the epicenter of this terrible plague in the United States. And that reality was hitting us as we were trying to do the budget. Our budget, as you know, statutorily is due by April 1st. We needed to address a lot of these issues in the budget, but without any certainty about what the resources would be, what we would get from the federal government, how we would be able to proceed. So it was very, very difficult. I think many of you already know that there was a discussion about Medicaid, a discussion about having counties pay, anything over 2%. And there was a lot of discussion around healthcare in general. And obviously, education, and I know Senator Mayer will get more into that, was also something that we are always trying to fight to increase. We're always trying to reduce the burden on our counties and our municipal governments, and we're always trying to increase the opportunities to send resources to educate our kids. And then there's everything else. And we realized that there was no certainty. The federal government at that point had passed the package that was extremely helpful. I do want to give a shout out to Senator Schumer, who made sure that state and local governments were included in that first package. Well, we don't call it a stimulus, when we don't call it a bailout, but it certainly was very, very needed resources. And those resources were targeted to small businesses, to state and local government, which initially were not to be considered, as well as education. And it was with those kinds of funds that we were able to bulk up our unemployment insurance and hold education harmless. And in addition to this, we were fighting hard, and we got hundreds of millions of dollars put back into the healthcare budgets. And, we took it from there. Also, obviously, Senator Gillibrand has been extremely helpful, and our congressional delegation. As much as we were able to get through, and it was very difficult because there were a lot of things that we would have all liked to see different in the budget. Everyone said this is not the budget that we wanted to pass, and it wasn't. But it was a budget that we needed to pass because of the fact that we have such uncertainty in terms of what is going to happen in the future. And again, we passed it by April 2nd, and we had in the budget given the governor the opportunity to come back in different intervals to take a look at what we were doing economically. So the next time this look is going to happen is now. And by May 15th, we will be able to find out what the governor is proposing based on whether or not we have resources. As of right now, I know that all of you know we are begging our congressional representatives to go back. They went back subsequently and really focused on small businesses because the first package, apparently the small businesses, for the most part, did not get the resources, and instead it seemed to have gone to some of the very biggest corporations. And so they went back and they wanted to deal with the smaller businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, and certainly very, very important and critical issues, but nothing was for the state or local government. So we are now facing a $13 billion deficit. And unless we get substantial help from the federal government, we don't have the resources to be able to, get ourselves out of the fiscal hole that we are in because of the cost of the pandemic And as I said, because obviously New York is New York, and we are the epicenter of that pandemic. So we are all really finding every single way to ask our congressional, delegation to please come forward with a package that is going to benefit our communities right here in the state, right here in the local communities, because without it, we just can't sustain ourselves. However, I've also said that we know that we're going to have an answer for a lot of the things that people are facing right now. The governor has extended the non-eviction, moratorium, which is obviously important, and that's till August 20th. But we still haven't figured out what's going to happen on August 21st. So I've asked my Senate colleagues to really, try and figure out what is the path forward, because we know that there are so many New Yorkers, so many people that we all represent that are simply unable to pay their bills. The the unemployment insurance, the numbers applying for it is somewhere between 1 million and 3 million in our state. And I know I don't have to tell any of you how difficult it is because of the overload of the system to really even get through, whether it's pandemic unemployment insurance, whether it is, just normal unemployment insurance. It is so extremely difficult. So we need to figure out what's going to happen. We need congressional help to figure out what's going to happen with people who are renting their spaces, whether they're people in apartments or small businesses. We need to figure that out. The other thing, obviously, is we need to figure out, how we go forward. And I've asked people to look at revenues as well, because I think at some point everything is on the table, and it is really some are feeling this in a very, very deep way. And I just think it's important that we all, as New Yorkers, because we all understand, as you more than anyone understands, that we are in this together. And I think we're all being called upon to do more. And if there is more to be done, as legislators, want to make sure that we are doing everything we can. But again, nothing we can do internally as New Yorkers will be able to get us out of this very, very deep situation that we're in with the revenue. But again, I'm depending on our congressional delegation to really fight the fight and to bring the resources home. I will say that I think that the governor has done an extraordinary job in articulating what the issues have been as they've happened. And I think the leadership that New York has demonstrated on every level in this very critical situation is something that we should all be proud of. And I am particularly proud of the philanthropy of our nonprofits here in Westchester County, because we all know that you exist, because government can't do everything, nor has there ever been an illusion that government can. But the number of ways that you have stepped up in every single way, and Rich outlined it, we often under-resourced, often you're dealing with the most vulnerable, and the staff are very often very, they're not getting a lot for the amount of heart and soul that you all put into the work for other people. So it's been difficult. It's been difficult with cost of living. It's been difficult with so many things around the nonprofit area. And then, of course, we lost the ability to do member items years and years ago. We've tried to help randomly. We've tried to help in terms of bolstering, whether it's legal services or, just some of the huge issues that are impacting our communities. But the reality is is that we will fight to make sure, as we have been fighting to make sure, that the role that you play is recognized, that the role that you play is supported, and that we find a way to help you continue to do this in this most, devastating time. So I'm glad to have this moment with you to thank you all, to tell you that you are valued more than I think you'll ever know, and that because you exist, I know that we will ultimately get on the other side of this and continue to be a strong and vibrant community. Thank you.
Thank you, Senate Majority Leader. I think the reality that this is a grim situation for all of us. Something we all understand, but your heartfelt support of our sector is you've been there for us in good times, you've been there for us in bad times. So we know we can count on that leadership during this time period. And I appreciate some of the thoughts about the path ahead, and maybe we'll drill into a couple things on the budget side in the Q&A. But thank you, and thank you for all of your support.
You're welcome.
At this time, we're going to bring in Senator Mayer and allow Senator Mayer to add to those comments and expound a little bit on some other areas, and maybe a little bit of a highlight in the education arena. But let me give you the floor, Senator Mayer, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you to all of NPW. Thank you, Anahata, and thank you to Jan for your leadership. I mean, this really is a moment for leadership. And to that end, in addition to congratulating our governor, who I think, it's no secret, we've had our ups and downs with the governor, but he has been extraordinary in this moment in providing the kind of competent and empathetic leadership we need both. And to that end, I just want to say that, we are so fortunate in Westchester, and I'm fortunate to have Andrea as my friend and leader, because this is a hard time to be a leader of a legislative conference. We've given a great deal of power to the governor. It was the right thing to do. I think we saw that bad things were coming. We needed a unified response, and I'm pleased that we gave that power. That being said, we have in our conference 40 independently elected people who represent all the different areas of New York, and we are unified in our commitment to the people we serve, and particularly the people you serve in your organizations. I mean, I think about it every day. When we talk about the disproportionate impact of this coronavirus on people of color, it's a lot of the people that you serve, whether it's in the Child Care Council or Community Resource Center of Immigrant or Catholic Charities or West Hab. We understand that we have a particular obligation as a progressive democratic conference to speak up and ensure that the people you serve and the people who work for you are treated the best we can under the circumstances. So to that end, I'm going to sort of segue from what the leader said over to some of the challenges going forward and a little bit about education. As she said, we are fighting very hard, and we absolutely need allies in the fight to get federal money to go to the state of New York and to our localities, our cities, towns, and villages. Without that money, we face this unbelievable budget gap that we cannot make up. It is not the time to ask New York State for the money that we probably owe each of your organizations and that we fought for, and we fought for again this year in the budget. This is a time we do not have tax revenue. The delay in the tax filing, coupled with the loss of revenue and the decline in our economy at such a substantial rate, means that New York State simply doesn't have the money to run its own operation, to give AIM, that's the money for states and for towns and villages and cities, to pay their police and fire and sanitation, to sustain things like the Youth Bureau. All of these essential functions of government are really on the line. So we need the money from the federal government, and now is not a time for the partisanship. We really need it on a bipartisan basis. So I do want to particularly commend Congresswoman Lowy and Mr. Engel. They've been our allies and champions on this issue. but we are going to need people of both parties in the Senate and the House, as well as the president, to recognize this is the moment to step up for New York and those states that had a disproportionate number of fatalities and costs associated with COVID. And the governor's made a strong case and will continue to do so. At the same time, we've been making a case from an education perspective, where thanks to the federal money, we were able to avoid cuts in this year's funding. But all we did with that federal money was bridge to a hold harmless provision where no district is receiving less than they did last year. As a practical matter, that means there is less money because contracts went up, leases went up, costs went up, and the needs of children have gone up. So that being said, we are asking our federal colleagues to put dedicated education funds for K-12 and for SUNY and CUNY in the next federal package of bills. And again, Congresswoman Lowy and Mr. Engel and both of our senators have been very supportive. We don't want to play winners and losers between the not-for-profit sector, education, healthcare. We know that all of these things are essentials. We can't be fighting against each other. You need our schools to work and to be successful, for there to be learning for every child, regardless of where they live. And we need for our not-for-profit sector to be supported, because we know you are taking care of our neighbors, our friends, and sustaining them through this period. So we are hopeful there'll be, in addition to general money for the state and municipalities, there'll be education money, again, distributed through a Title I formula in the next bill. But we're pressing for it. We don't know what will happen. And of course, we're concerned the governor will use the power that the leader described in making certain cuts in education and in healthcare and in municipal spending. That's what he's suggested. And we'll probably hear more details this week if the federal bill doesn't go far enough. So to that end, we are going to, as the leader said, put everything on the table, all the suggestions of ideas. I have a bill that, because of the coronavirus, suggests that people who make over $5 million a year should, on a temporary basis, pay a higher tax rate. Because I have seen in my district, and I'm sure you all see it too, the impact of this virus has fallen disproportionately, not only on people of color, but on those earning, I would say, less than $70,000 a year. Those are the ones who are struggling with unemployment, loss of small business, the obligations of caring for older people, and all of the real, tangible, personal pain of this virus on people has fallen disproportionately on the lower end of our income spectrum. And therefore, I am suggesting we should have a shared sacrifice at the higher end. But that's one of many ideas that my colleagues have put forward. We also know, for example, that our immigrant community, our undocumented immigrant community, is not eligible for unemployment. And so many of them are on the front lines of economic hardship. And many of you are caring for them and supporting them. And we want to support that. We know our colleague, Senator Ramos, is proposing a bill that would create some kind of funding to offset the economic harm that they face. I know, representing Portchester, parts of New Rochelle and White Plains, and Yonkers, along with Andrea, that we have a very significant portion of an undocumented community that was working and contributing, and now is on the sidelines and really struggling. And to that end, you know, the leader was the champion for getting millions of dollars in our budget for food banks. And now the governor is getting it out the door. But I'm sure you see firsthand the need for food. I, for one, have never seen a moment like this in a community like Westchester, where the need for food is absolutely greater than our ability to provide it. And so we need to support food banks. And whether we get that money through the federal stimulus or the next package, or we have to find creative ways to create revenue, we absolutely are committed to doing that. I want to mention a few other things in the education space, some of which you mentioned, Rich. We know that because of distance learning, a number of portions of our community have not done as well as others, and it is a challenge that we have an obligation to fix. First place, the inequity in access to technology and broadband is a real problem in so many of our districts. In New Rochelle, I know they gave out Chromebooks. In Yonkers, they're doing their best. In White Plains, they've tried and they're doing quite well. But we have communities where many children do not have access to either the technology hardware or have internet capacity, or where they're sharing a phone. We heard this story the other day, Andrea and I, between 9 and 11, it's the second grader, and between 11 and 1, it's the fifth grader. And then it is the high school student who's probably taking care of the children while the parent is out working as an essential worker. So we know the inequity in access to technology has made it very difficult to have real quality distance learning, and it's never the same as a school experience. So we know that. Secondly, we know that for our children with special needs, this has not been an ideal episode. We just cannot replicate the richness of experience and services that we need for these kids, whether they're young or whether they're even of college age or older. We can't do it as well. And I know many of you are taking care of people in group homes and in other settings where they used to go out for a day of activities, and that has been cut out. We are very aware that there is an inequity in the impact, and it's one of the things that our conference is very, very mindful about. Some of you may know I've sort of made it my mission to pay attention to first-line workers who I thought weren't getting all the credit, largely people of color, working for the agencies like ARC and IAHD and Cerebral Palsy of Westchester, and so many of the groups, and Jan has helped me with this, because I think that we want them to know, we recognize they are putting themselves in harm's way. They are working and endangering their own families by going home at night. And they do it with a great deal of love and devotion. And they are being paid at the very bottom of the pay scale. Not that you wouldn't all pay them more if we could. We're going to fight for it. But we want to make sure that all of the heroes, and there are many in this movement, including doctors and nurses and police and fire and EMTs and all on the front lines, also includes those who are taking care of our most vulnerable. So those are the kinds of challenges we're going to have when we find out what the real numbers are on how much money there is. It's unfortunate it comes down to such a blunt instrument as a budget, but that's where we are. And because we have leadership of Senator Stewart-Cousins, and we have wonderful colleagues who are committed to working for their communities, whether they are communities in Brooklyn or in upstate New York or in Buffalo or here in Westchester, our colleagues as a group, and I can say that having been in Albany many years in many different ways, is incredibly committed to the personal challenges that our constituents face because of their circumstances. And our challenge now is to do the best we can under this very difficult circumstance to support you who are leading the way in the not-for-profit sector. So let me just close by saying that, as Andrea said, we appreciate, we are your friends when things are good. That's easy. Now's a time when things are not so good. And we need to be your friends and your champions and stand up for you. But we also have to be realistic and honest. There isn't enough money. We have to piece together what we can, prioritize the best we can, encourage people to step up and share. Those who are at the top end, this is a time to step up and do your best and lead by saying, I don't need as much. We saw some of that during the last PPP go-round, where some businesses that really were not the intended beneficiaries jumped in and got ahead of line for so many others, including not-for-profits. We can't have that happen. We have to have a bigger sense of sacrifice and commitment, empathy, and a sense we are in this together. So I am hopeful that with Andrea's leadership and with the governor and with our colleagues in the assembly, we're going to do the best we can and come up with what I would call an imperfect compromise over the next month. And then perhaps again, to sustain those who need the most, to help our economy rebuild in a safe way, and at the same time use science and facts to guide our decisions about the best way to move forward. It's a challenging time. It's a sad time to every day have a pile of condolence notes on my desk because so many people we know or know of have passed away under terrible circumstances. But this is our challenge, and we are all up to it. And so I'm very, very fortunate to be part of this community, to have my friend Andrea with me, really as a soulmate during this travail, and to think that we will do our best for all of you and the people you serve in these challenging times. Thank you. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Senator Mayer. And in a moment here, we'll bring both senators in, and I will do my best with some Q&A, which was made pretty easy because you guys are so plugged in that you basically covered so much, stole so much of my thunder. There was a lot to unpack that both of you shared. So let me start with a couple comments and then a couple of the questions that are coming in, and I'll do my best to field some of what we've heard. But I think everyone tuning in today is probably very happy that we have a state that is using science and facts and letting that be the guide. I think we all agree that saving human life, there is no price tag on that, and we are all invested in that first and foremost. But the budget fallout that results in this, because of some of the vital services that the nonprofit sector delivers, actually with a trickle-down effect would be future disasters in lower-income communities and future hardship. So unfortunately, this is a case where, like the loss of human life, then corresponding with the budget cut, kind of compounds the challenges. So I think both of you gave a really lovely and supportive message, but also some of that grim reality as we navigate this collectively. So I think we kind of have a shared understanding of where we are, but there's we always need to remain hopeful on how we can overcome, and as New Yorkers, of course, we will overcome. So let me ask a basic question first. I know that the governor is about to essentially respond to the budget that was put forth, and then there will be a process from there. Can you just share with everyone tuning in kind of some of the budget milestones so that everyone has a sense of the budget process from here?
Yeah, well, the milestone of what happened, again, the way it normally goes is that in January, when the governor does the State of the State, a few weeks after, he'll present a budget. And the budget is then given to us. I say to everyone that the governor has an inordinate amount of power in the budget process. It is his budget. It is his ideal of what's supposed to happen. He hands it to the legislature. We're not able to add money. We're not able to move things around unless there's an agreement by the governor, frankly, to do that. We can take away money. And of course, thanks for that. But and if we want to do something, we've got to figure out a way to pay for it within the confines of what he's already presented. So that's the reality of our budget. What normally then happens, and what did happen, is that we have hearings. We invite all of the state agencies, various impacted, the school districts, the healthcare, where everybody in to testify about this budget presentation. And then we, as a deliberative body in the Senate, as well as in the Assembly, determine how it is we would normally spend the resources and where we would like to put them. That's normally in what we call our one-house budgets. Because the pandemic occurred, we never, either house, even put out a one-house budget because it was such an extreme and dire circumstance that there's frankly was no time and no energy to be expended in putting out a quote-unquote wish list as you saw the ground eroding under your feet. So we decided to go straight to where we knew we had to go in order to sustain the state departments, Department of Health, our essential workers, so many that you all as Senator Mayer indicated, are depending on to provide the resources and help the workforce and so on and so forth. Education, healthcare, we went straight to that, stem the bleeding, and really help to put down every other thing and fight this pandemic. So we passed the budget already on April 2nd. Now, people are going to look, the DOB, the Division of Budget, is going to look to see how what we passed stands up in the face of what is. And again, I think Senator Mayer said what happened. Obviously, since then, we've deferred when people need to pay taxes. We've closed down businesses, so there's no sales tax, there's no income tax, there's a lot of revenue. You will hear MTA, ridership is down 92%. Think of all of the things that, whether it was tolls or tickets or fares or whatever it is, all the things that created what would normally sustain New York is frankly, for the most part, not operating. I will say, though, that we, of course, as a legislator, as legislatures, continue to operate. And I didn't mention initially, but I do want to make sure people understand that we have passed resolutions that allow us to work remotely, and we have been working remotely, and we will continue to work remotely. We will have a hearing on small businesses and the impact on today, actually. I'm sorry, the 13th at 10 a.m. And we'll have another hearing on the 18th, the following week, on the disparate impacts in terms of communities of color and so on and so forth. We're going to have hearings on unemployment insurance. We're going to have hearings on education. We're going to have hearings on nursing home. We're going to have hearings on just so many of the things that we know matter to New Yorkers, in addition to being able to have session, committee hearings, and vote remotely. We are therefore able to input. However, when the governor presents whatever he's going to present on the 15th, there is a limitation. Again, it's not the budget. There will be a limitation. He will present whatever he believes he should do. We will examine it, obviously, and I said, and have some response to it. And so that's where we are. But again, in the absence of real federal dollars that are coming down from DC, and I said we talk about that because they are the only ones that don't have to balance their budget. We have to balance our budget on the state level, and B, they obviously have an infinite ability to print money and to galvanize resources, which we don't have. So that's where we are.
Yeah, no, understood. And I appreciate that kind of summary, so we understand what process the governor is doing right now and what like those next steps look like. Yeah, so the state does not have the luxury of running an unbalanced budget, nor does the 200 nonprofit Westchester members that have to pay our bills and pay our staff. Like we all are in, a survival mode and have to keep up with obligations. Could we just talk for 1 minute on the revenue side? I know there are a lot of unclear things. I know that we need money from the feds to trickle down. I know Senator Mayer mentioned a proposed tax to the very high income earners. I know there have been questions about state rainy day fund usage. Do either of you have a comment about anything forthcoming on the revenue side to provide some level of relief other than waiting for the federal, outcomes?
Well, I'll jump in because I'm involved in really trying to come up with options that we're going to present to the leader to figure out how to move forward. And I think a realistic issue is that we will get some money but it won't be enough money. And that is the real challenge we face. So I'm hopeful that Mitch McConnell, the leader, and the president recognize that we've stepped up for every other state, whether they had a flood or whatever happened. We never said we're not going to give to Louisiana. We're not going to give, we in New Yorkers, we wanted to give much more to Puerto Rico. We know when people need you step up. It's not a matter of partisanship. So I hope they do. But I think that our concern is it won't be enough to fill our gap, the gap which has gotten so much bigger since we adopted the budget. And so we are going to give the leader a range of opportunities to think about what makes sense. I mean, for one, I myself have not been a fan of additional taxes. We live in the highest property tax county in the country, and it is not realistic to ask the people who are retirees and seniors living in their houses. Andrea and I are both from Yonkers, throughout our county, who have paid their mortgage and are struggling to stay in their houses just to pay their property tax. So we have to be mindful of that. At the same time, there may be some ways for the state to access revenue. There may be the opportunity to borrow, for example, at low interest rates. There may be some additional revenues like my tax idea, which is devoted to both lower and higher education. But our colleagues have other ideas of not only taxes, certain kinds of fees that we could reassess, even on a temporary basis. So I think we're going to hopefully give the leader a range of options, recognizing these are tough choices that, frankly, no elected official wants to make. This is not the time where we can do only what we like. We have to do what we have to do. And so, I think we are working on collectively providing a range of options for our colleagues to consider. And I just want people to understand how it works in the Senate under Andrea's leadership. We have a true sort of democratic operation where every member, regardless of seniority, if you've been there 20 years, you've been there 1 year, you have a voice at that table. And we have strong members who have opinions, who represent diverse communities. We have communities where the inability to pay rent is the number one issue. And then we have communities where the inability to make your mortgage is the number one issue. And we have to try to incorporate all those with Andrea's leadership. So I'm hopeful we'll put range of things on the table. My idea is based on the fact that during this epidemic, the people who earn $5 million, while they may have a loss because the market went down, they don't have a loss that's commensurate to the people that we're helping get unemployment, or the people in the small businesses in Tuckahoe and Eastchester and Mount Vernon and wherever who lost everything in a single day that their business closed down. So because there's such great inequity in the degree of sacrifice, I think it's an appropriate moment to say, let's step up where we can. And so that's my idea. But again, my colleagues have others. There are ideas on revenue that have been out there for a long time, and I have not had the appetite, and I don't think the leaders had the appetite to tax people more and charge people more. But we may have to do it on a temporary basis, but we will defer to her leadership and our collective judgment, and also what our colleagues and the governor will find acceptable to meet this whole.
Yeah,
I don't know
thank
how
you.
to add something to that.
No, I mean, I think you've outlined the process. I certainly, as a new majority leader, and again, at the outset of our ability to take the helm after decades, frankly, of not being able to lead in terms of policy as Democrats, to find ourselves in a position where we actually have 40 Democrats, as Shelley said, geographically diverse, demographically diverse. We're the most diverse, and I think they said just the most representative of New York State that's ever happen in a majority in the Senate. And so I would be foolish as a leader not to take full advantage of all of the voices and all of the talent and all of the views that come. So this revenue conversation, however, because we were new, was never one that I was taking up because, there's always the tax and spend Democrats, there's always stereotypes. And we don't want to, we're doing fine as New York. We were doing fine. And now we're not. And as it continues to not because of anything that we've done, but because of a global pandemic that has hit us hard. And so now it is unreasonable, as Senator Mayer was saying, not to examine, where we go, how we go, what are all our options. And so that's why I asked her to be part of a revenue working group to take a look. And she had her own ideas as well. And let's see what we could do. But, I always couch this in the reality. The reality is that whatever we can do, we can't do most of what needs to be done. And so even if if you have a small tax, or whatever on billionaires, millionaires, but then it's dedicated here. But then we've got, the other pocket of need. And then we've got this. So the reality is that whatever we have is not going to be enough to be able to sustain ourselves and to really lift up all of the various areas that need to be lifted up, which you all know so well. So that's where we are. And
Sure.
I just, again, appreciate your understanding that.
Yeah, so I want to use our last few minutes together as productively as possible. I am not in any way keeping up with demand on the questions that are coming in, but as I said before, you were able to answer a lot of these questions in your remarks. So let's call this the lightning round and try to cover a few things. So we've met a couple times. A lot of our employees are on the front lines, and while the general public sees healthcare workers and recognizes them and should, and now we see our grocery store workers and recognizes them and we should, there are also so many of us that are working in shelters, in foster care, in senior communities, in feeding programs. So one question specifically there is, and again, lightning round, questions have come up around hazard pay, around hero pay. I know some of that needs to come from the federal government, but is there any quick comments about including parts of the essential nonprofit workforce in any of that kind of effort?
Well, I think, on the federal level, there are, because there's money, as Andrea said, and we don't have any, and we know we need it. And frankly, I know that many of your agencies, even because I spoke with them, even without having money, are paying a premium to encourage their workers to come to work and to make sure they recognize that we need them. And so I know that in so many of the not-for-profits, your agencies have paid a bump up or given some kind of bonus during this period, which frankly is necessary, but you didn't know where you're going to get it back from, and who knows. But, Senator Schumer has this pandemic premium pay fund, or no, he has a Heroes Fund, which would pay additionally. I mean, that would be wonderful if you could get some of that out there. There are some ideas at the state level, but again, these are so dependent on having enough money. And there are some bills dealing with first responders. But I think the danger of limiting it to first responders is, as you said, Rich, there are so many other people who have taken tremendous personal risk and gone out there. Someone told me about a worker in one of the group homes who had like a 5-year-old at home, but because someone was tested positive, she had to stay at the group home for 2 weeks in order to ensure that the virus wouldn't spread. So she left her 5-year-old for 2 weeks with, either a husband or somebody else. And there is a tremendous sacrifice being done here. So I would love to see the federal bill include some real economic relief for those on the front line, and to have it be broader than our traditional views of police, fire, and EMTs who really have done absolutely heroic work. But
Definitely.
the notion of essential worker should be broader, in my opinion.
Sure. I'm going to try to wrap up some of this in one more topic, and then thank you both for your time. And I know there's a lot to do today, but so much of what we've talked about is around disproportionate effects, inequality. We've mentioned the plight of immigrants that are often working essential jobs but not included in stimulus funds. We've talked about lower income students that might not have internet and abilities to do distance learning. So, the phrase that all of our celebrities like to use is we're all in this together. That's true to a degree. We're not all affected the same way. So quarantining from Malibu and quarantining from the south side of Mount Vernon are different realities. And some of what we've seen in coronavirus is that the communities that already had, disproportionate health outcomes and at lack of access to healthy food and so much of what we know around inequality, those are the very same communities that have been impacted, that have had loss of life. And with looming cuts and an erosion of safety net services, these could be communities that further face challenges in times to come. I know neither of you want to let that happen, and both of you are champions, for us and for these communities. Can we maybe close with some remarks on how we can focus our efforts on communities hardest hit in coronavirus?
I'll say let Andrea close, if that's okay. Just,
Sure.
You hit the nail on the head, Rich. We can't walk out of this without realizing that this exposed both inherent racism in American society at a greater level than I think some people ever recognize, as well as income disparity like we never saw. And we have to, as the governor said, use this as a lesson, a moment to improve, not go back to the way it was. So I think we're very mindful of it. And it strikes a very deep chord in American culture and American insight that this is a moment we have to make a change. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea, who can speak most personally about that.
Thank you, Senator Mayor.
Thank you. I mean, and I think the fissure is such that we all are forced to look at it, but the reality is that we look at it in different ways. And so you see the division in America in many ways. There'll be people who will decide that the people who are the hardest impacted sort of kind of deserved it because, whatever. And then there's the people who understand that it is the inequality, it is the original sin in many ways of racism that has, created where we are today. And so we have to decide who we are and what it is we're going to do. And that's when, because I'm a good political person, I got to talk about the census. I've got to talk about elections. And I've got to talk about the fact that they matter. The fact that we're having a conversation like this in a moment like this about which direction we go in underscores where we are. We have choices to make, and we've got to step up and make them. We have to make sure everyone's counted, and we have to make sure that when they are counted, we go to the polls and elect people who decide that America is an experiment that works when democracy works and when we invest in our people. And that's what we need to do. And then we have to vote. And then we have to make sure that we make the changes, because this year's census will depend on who's representing districts, who gets to draw the district lines. And it could be, I'm just saying, it could be the first time that the state Senate under Democratic hands, if we are able to keep our majority, can actually draw lines that are fair, that are not gerrymandered, and have a majority of people who are absolutely focused on public service and the well-being of the public. So it's a choice, and let's not let it go.
Thank you. And I think we've summarized things pretty well. I know covering the budget realities is challenging, but it's a reality we have to face. And the way that we can come together, care for those most affected, rise above, and rebound and take care of one another is super important. I want to thank our two senators for joining us today. I know you have a lot on your shoulders these days. The decisions you're making are, in fact, impacting our communities and saving lives in our state. And I want to thank the 200 member organizations of NPW because the work you're doing, the impact you're making is saving lives in our state. And we will find a path together. But I think I speak for everyone when I say we appreciate your leadership and your representation. We appreciate you spending some time with our membership today. I hope that both of you stay safe. And lastly, I want to thank VCAST for producing today's event. So best of luck as we continue to navigate, and thank you from the nonprofit sector and your partners.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, all of you.
Take care,
Thank you.
Senators.
Don't lose hope.
Thanks for everyone today for tuning in. Continue to do the amazing work you do. Thank you to Jan Fisher and everyone at NPW for keeping us together during this time period. And we will continue to have more sessions like this one as we navigate the path ahead. And again, thank you to VCAST for getting this message out there today. Thank you to everyone. Stay safe.